I'm going to tell you about my last shift as a Templar security guard. That shift was the reason that I quit that job, and also the reason that I checked myself into a clinical mental health unit. I was told that I must have been hallucinating what I saw, but I've had a long time to reflect on what happened, and I don't think I was. This actually happened. I'm sure of it. At least, I'm pretty sure. When I got hired at Templar Security Solutions, I was at a low point in my life. My longtime girlfriend had just broken up with me. My parents had basically cut me off, telling me that I needed to get sober before I could be around them, my siblings, or my nieces and nephews. And my friends said the same thing. I was lonely. I was isolated. But it was my fault. I wouldn't say that I was an alcoholic. Who am I kidding? Isn't this why I went to therapy for 3 years? Yes, I was dependent on alcohol. My name is Randy, and I'm an alcoholic. Happy? The line that I drew was that I would never go to work drunk. But the second that I got off work, I would either go to the bar to drink or I would go home to drink. I never went to bed sober. Never. Somehow, though, I fooled myself into thinking that I wasn't an alcoholic. I thought to myself that I just liked to drink. Like I said, though, being a security guard was a dead-end job for me. I was assigned to one specific patrol every night. My shift would start at 10 p.m. and end at 5 a.m., and for that entire time I would be tasked with guarding an abandoned military base on the edge of my small town. The base had long since been deserted, so the dozen or so stone buildings were ivy-covered, empty, and mostly falling apart. The only thing I was guarding the place from was the occasional delinquent teenager. I had a small square post at the entrance of the overgrown base with a tiny TV which I used to watch endless reruns of Dateline. But I was expected to go on occasional patrols, flashing my light around the expanse of grounds. I tried to avoid that though, unless I was given a cause to go looking. I wasn't a police officer, obviously. I was a private security guard, and Templar Security Solutions has strict policies against carrying firearms. The only thing we got to take with us was an extendable baton, which we were only permitted to use in the most dire circumstances. But I always made sure to carry my pocket knife around with me, just in case a drunk little shit decided to get too violent and I actually needed to protect myself. My last shift happened on an early September night. The air was sufficiently cool to make me wear my Templar Security Solutions jacket to my station that evening. Funny enough, most of that shift was uneventful. I remember just sitting in that small, square haven of light in the middle of that vast darkness and watching a few episodes of Dateline. The reception out there was spotty at the best of times, so usually, if I wanted to watch something on my phone, I needed to download it. I remember the time that everything shifted. It was 2:31 a.m. I remember that time exactly because that was the time that I heard that noise. That noise that sent me on my doomed quest into the darkness. It was a distant, strange cackle. At the time, I thought it was the high-pitched laugh of a teenage girl. Looking back, though, I'm not so sure. But I heard the noise, I looked at the time, 2:31 a.m. I grabbed my flashlight and slipped out of my little box of light and safety, moving into the dark, vast, abandoned base. I thought it was a group of teenagers. That wouldn't have been surprising or shocking to me, so I wasn't particularly nervous as I walked across the dark grounds. My flashlight shone in front of me, illuminating the black, dominating buildings scattered across the overgrown fields. Occasionally, my light would flicker over the surrounding woods, searing into the complete darkness of the Washington forest. I shivered in the cool air. I zipped my jacket up, the noise of that echoing through the empty space around me. I continued forwards, moving for the building at the far end of the base. For some reason, that was the one that the kids always partied in. I think it was because it was the safest building, the least unstable. Most of it was still standing, including the 4 stories of hallways and rooms. Even so, though, one side of that structure had a giant hole in it, a pile of rubble and stone on the ground below. So safe isn't the word I would use to describe it. As I approached that building, I squinted forwards. I was looking for the telltale sign of a teenage occupation. A muted hum of music, laughter, some clinking bottles, maybe a little bit of light, but there was nothing. The building was dark and quiet, looming over the rest of the abandoned base like a strict lord. I got closer and closer. I began to doubt that the sound I had heard was a group of kids. The large blasted structure was completely silent. If the culprit had been a group of teenagers, then it was the quietest group of teenagers I had ever seen. There was no noise coming from the building, but I do remember noticing a strange noise in the distance. Some sort of muted alarm. It blared and then died, blared and then died. I could barely hear it. I had to really stop walking and focus on the noise to realize what it was. And that wasn't the only thing that I noticed. Through the woods, far away, there was the almost perceptible flash of red, spinning like a lighthouse, lighting up the woods in its amber hue for a moment and then vanishing, lighting it up and then vanishing. The alarm and the red, panicked light put me on edge. I can't explain why. Whatever the emergency was, it was happening in the distance. Still, I remember shivering again, spooked by it. I walked up to the half-destroyed base, crossed into the building. The long, cavernous hallways were full of dust and rubble. Chunks of drywall and brick were scattered about, hazardous to anybody walking through the building, but I knew the place well. I knew the areas to avoid, and I knew the spots where the teenagers usually gathered. So I checked them. I checked the old officer's mess. It was empty. I checked the large, wide, rubble-coated basement. It was empty. I checked the old infirmary, full of metal bed frames. Again, it was empty. The building around me was large and silent. The only sound was the echo of my footsteps, the wisp of my breath. My flashlight led the way, piercing through the blackness, illuminating the peeling walls, the dirty floor, and the empty rooms. My last stop was the 3rd floor. I walked up the narrow set of stairs and marched down the long, dark hallway. I reached the room at the end of the hall. Honestly, I didn't know what it had been in its glory days. Some sort of lounge. There were a few portraits on the walls, stained and foggy, showing old men with long mustaches. I flashed my light around the room. Empty, empty, empty. There was a large window at the far end of this chamber. I walked over to it and peered out into the woods. I was high enough to see over the tops of some of the pine trees, so I could make out the vague shape of a square building in the distance, which was lit up with that red alarm. Again, I could barely hear the muted sounds of that blaring, undulating siren. There was another high-pitched cackle. The same noise I had heard earlier. It echoed through the hallway behind me, repeating. I spun around, my flashlight blazing into that blackness. At first, I didn't see anything. I walked back to the door of the chamber and continued to flash my light around the long hallway that led to the staircase. Again, I didn't see anything, just an empty corridor. Just the dust and debris and plaster of an abandoned building. But then my light slid over the back of the hall, the small square of wall at the very end of the corridor. And there was something there. something at the top of the stairs. Someone was poking their head up from the stairs, peering over the final step at me. Just the top portion of their head was visible, but I could barely see it because of the distance. "Hey," I said. "Hey, you're trespassing. You need to leave." I walked forwards, the light on the person's face getting stronger. I was able to see them more clearly, but then I stopped. My heart froze in my chest, ice running through my veins. There was something wrong with the person at the end of the hall. They were bald. Their head was wrapped in yellowish, wrinkly, leathery skin. Their eyes were completely black, and on the floor, gripping the curve where their final stair turned to the hallway, there were two hands, long-fingered. "Hello?" My voice echoed through the space. The person at the end of the hallway didn't move. They just stared at me, staying in that exact spot. It looked like an old man, a large, bald old man, with black eyes, black, beady eyes. Just as I realized the horrible wrongness of the thing at the end of the hall, it disappeared. The face slipped down, vanishing below the corridor, ghosting back down the stairs. I remember standing there, flashlight in hand, frozen in place. I didn't know what to do. Honestly, I didn't know if I had seen that thing correctly. My mind was already racing, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it had been some sort of teenager playing a prank. Maybe. Eventually, I steeled myself enough to continue forwards. I moved slowly, wincing at the echoing sound of my footsteps in the large, empty building. Suddenly, all I wanted to do was get out of there. Even if there were teenagers running amok, I didn't want to deal with it. It didn't seem worth it now. But I didn't see or hear anything else as I walked down that hallway. I reached that staircase and shined my flashlight down onto the second floor. All I saw were piles of plaster and rubble and stone, no faces, no eyes, no yellow, leathered skin. Slowly I walked down the stairs, my skin prickling with goosebumps, my breath coming faster. I kept expecting something to jump out of the darkness, come towards me. I reached the second floor and flashed my light around the hallway. Just like the floor above, it was empty. I was getting closer to the exit. I turned back to the staircase and looked down at the first floor. At first, there was nothing. Just an empty floor below, the same dust and dirt. Then, slowly, that same head peeked out from the right side of the first floor hallway. It looked up at me, face flat, black eyes staring up at me. For the first time in my life, I literally gasped in fear. I took a step back, and the flashlight slipped out of my hands, clanging to the stone floor, almost sliding off the edge of the steps and down the stairs. I folded over and grasped for it. My heart seized in my chest. I scooped up the flashlight and shined it back down the stairs again. That thing had slid out from behind the wall. It was at the base of the stairs. Its long, yellow limbs were covered in strange tufts of sparse fur. At this distance, I could see the details of it. Its disgusting skin, leathery and thick. From the top of its head, there were two small brown nubs. I had never seen anything like it, and I hope I will never see anything like it ever again. I screamed loudly. The sound filled the vacant space. I spun around and sprinted down the hallway. I didn't look back. My blood was pounding through my head, thumping into my temples, filling my ears with the sound of my own beating heart. I pushed open the door to the officer's mess and slammed it, shut behind me. I looked around, barely able to see, only some dim moonlight glazing in through a foggy window, and then I ran to the very far end of the room, to the closet near the dirty bar, squeezed myself into that dark black space and shut the door. My flashlight was still beaming through the small slats, so I shut it off. Christ, I can still remember the terror of that night so vividly. I was standing in that closet, waiting. My mind was full of horrible, awful thoughts, racing and wicked. I was so consumed by horror that I went numb. Some time passed. Could have been seconds, could have been hours. I was frozen in place, unable to move, barely able to think. And then the door to the officer's mess creaked open. A horrible groan. I held my breath, feeling the pounding of my heart in my ears. It was so loud, too loud. That thing would hear me. It would hear the beating of my heart. I tried to peer through the slats, but they were slanted, so it was difficult to see. I could make out the shadow of something moving to the side and then slowly crossing the room, coming closer to me. I knew what it was. I had no doubt. It was that thing, that monster, that creature. My breath started to come faster. I was on the verge of a breakdown, on the verge of a panic attack. Somehow, despite that, I willed myself to stay quiet, even though all I wanted to do was scream and cry and beg. I remember my panicked mind tormenting me with regret. I would never see my parents again. I would never see my brothers or my sister. I would never see their kids. I would die, and I would be remembered as a drunk, a failure. The shadow reached the closet. The creature, whatever it was standing right outside. I could feel its beady black eyes. Its heavy, raspy breath was a rhythmic sound, the prologue to my death. The door shifted, as if something touched it. In that moment, I reached for the pocket knife that I kept with me. I gripped the small handle and pulled it out. Even with the monster directly in front of me, I tried to stay quiet. I pulled the blade out of the handle and took a slow, steady breath. This was it. I would have one shot at this. I would succeed or I would die. The closet door began to shift to the side. Whatever was on the other side started opening it, pulling the wooden door. In a few seconds, the barrier between the monster and I would be gone. I would be exposed. I held my knife up to the slat that was about eye height, and I stabbed through the closet door. I pushed as hard as I could, driving my knife past the wood and into something tough, something that resisted the sharp blade. A terrible, high-pitched scream filled my head. Looking back, I can't help but shiver at how similar it had been to the pained scream of a woman. The shadow stumbled back, taking my knife with it, thudding footsteps moving backwards. It screamed again, and then, a second later, there was a crash, the shatter of something glass. Eventually, I managed to get up the courage to open the closet door. Even after everything I had heard, I was half expecting the creature to still be there, waiting to kill me. But the scene that greeted me was still and silent. The large window in the room had been smashed, leaving twinkling, glinting shards of glass on the floor. I could still hear the muted, pounding alarm in the distance, as if the sound was coming from my mind, birthed by my panic. Like I said, that was my last shift. After I stumbled back to my guard station, I sobbed to the police dispatcher on the phone, begging them to send someone, anyone. A pair of constables showed up relatively quickly. I spoke to them. They searched the grounds. They didn't find anything. And of course, they never did find anything. I could tell by the looks on their faces that they thought I was crazy or high, or maybe both. And the next morning I quit. I left Templar Security Solutions and drove myself straight to a hospital and had myself committed. For a long time, I believed what everyone told me. I thought that I had hallucinated that creature. I forced myself to forget what had happened that night. But recently, it's all come back to me. I know what I saw. There was a monster in that abandoned building that night. And I know that I was lucky to make it out of there alive.